The Smoking Aces get Jay Cutler for $4 million.
Fantasy football, a game that started out as a hobby for a few in the 60s, has grown into a cultural phenomenon today.
That's enough.
Just don't want to let him
Let it go. Let it go.
Everywhere you turn, from the TV,
It is the Dre.
to the bookshelves, to the radio,
I could almost make a case for Adrian Peterson.
fantasy football is staring right back at you. Now, before we go any further, we got to talk some numbers. Per the Fantasy Sports Trade Association, in 2008, $800 million was spent on fantasy football. In 2012, that number ballooned to $1.67 billion. To help us comprehend that number, the Minnesota Vikings were just valued by Forbes magazine as only $1.15 billion. So yes, the industry is a financial monster and everyone wants a piece of the fantasy pie, even companies in Sioux Falls. Take golf addiction, for example. By day, customers hit the virtual links.
All right, round two.
But at night before the season, it becomes a football frenzy.
It's like having your projector at your house, but yet you got the service right behind you. It's one of those things where we're big football guys, and this is a big industry, fantasy draft stuff. There's guys that do 4 or 5 different fantasy things. So we'll see one guy come in, and he's in one fantasy draft, and then he's in on the next part. He comes in, and he's 2 days later, he's in a whole nother one.
Golf Addiction started utilizing their projector screens last summer to host draft parties. And this year, things have really caught on.
We have about 16 scheduled. We'll probably get up to about that 25 to maybe 30 parties, depending on how many we crunch in that last week before football season starts. So good response. Sioux Falls is huge for fantasy football. Never had an idea it was this big, but now we know.
All right, so you've had your draft and you've picked your team, but the business and the money-making opportunities don't stop there. We've got a whole season to play through.
Drew Brees, Aaron Rodgers, Peyton Manning, that is your top-tier quarterbacks.
Chris Tubbs with KWSN Sports Radio is just one of thousands who host a fantasy radio show or podcast.
Ryan, who I think is going to have a bounce-back season.
And saw a golden opportunity to get more listeners in the area.
And I know fantasy's huge. I know there are a lot of hardcore fantasy football players and casual fantasy football players. And it's a chance for them on Thursday from 5 to 6 to call us up and ask questions and have somebody that's local in their area that can answer their fantasy football questions.
Tubbs takes an hour out of his scheduled programming on Thursdays to donate to fantasy football and helping others. But he takes a bit more time to tend to his own half-dozen teams.
Probably more than what my wife would probably want me to. In all seriousness, 7 days a week, maybe I'd say maybe about 20 hours a week.
So as the season will come to an end, there's still another piece of the fantasy pie still to be claimed.
I bet you I see about 50 to 60 so far.
This time every year, Mickey and her staff at MD Engraving prepare for the upcoming season, knowing leagues will want something to remember the year by.
We just give them some ideas that they can buy off the shelf. They can make some adjustments. They can add their own logos. There's a lot of things that people can do that we give them that option to do.
Even if some of the requests are a bit odd.
We even have someone who gives a toilet away at the end of the year for the worst team. So they play all different ranks of it, from the winners to the losers to the ones in between.
So if you hold a draft party, maybe spend a few hours a week getting help from experts or purchase an elaborate trophy. Don't think of fantasy football as a waste. Think of it as helping out the economy.